I want you on your knees right now. Stephen Brenner's voice echoed in my wife's mind as she drove home that night, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. The words weren't shouted, they were whispered against her ear as he cornered her in the supply closet, his breath hot on her neck, his hands sliding up her arm. "Excuse me," Jen had managed to say, her voice shaking despite her effort to sound confident. I said, "I want those quarterly reports on my desk by morning." Brenner replied smoothly, stepping back with that signature smirk that never reached his eyes. "What did you think I meant, Jennifer?" The mind game was deliberate, making her question if she'd misheard, making her doubt herself. Classic predator tactic. But Jen knew exactly what he'd said the first time when she told me the story, over dinner that night, the fork in my hand, bent from the pressure of my grip. I didn't say a word, just listened as tears streamed down her face. But in that moment, something ignited inside me, a cold, calculated rage I'd never experienced before. Stephen Brenner wouldn't just be stopped, he would be destroyed. I just didn't know yet how far we'd have to go to make it happen. Jen and I have always been a supportive couple, simple, hard-working from a small house on the southern outskirts of Beaumont, Texas. I worked for a repair crew at Wilson's Construction, fixing roofs, installing drywall, whatever needed doing. I was good with my hands, reliable enough that the boss made me crew lead. After 3 years, Jen was looking for something more permanent after the pandemic wiped out her position at the department store where she'd worked for 5 years. The world was a mess, and we were hanging on to contracts, temporary jobs wherever we could, when she got the job at Premier Logistics that serviced the huge meat plant called Gulfpack Foods. We both breathed a sigh of relief. Our savings had dwindled to almost nothing another month. Without steady income would have meant choosing between the mortgage and my mother's medical bills. The job seemed perfect. Stable, not physically demanding day shifts, an office on the second floor of a warehouse with actual air conditioning after 8 months of uncertainty. It felt like things were finally turning around. That first week, Jen came home, tired but excited, telling me about the logistics systems, the shipping schedules, how important her role was in keeping the supply chain moving. But after the first week, Jen seemed different, tense, distracted, a little silent. I thought she was just tired, adjusting to the new routine. "Are you okay there?" "No," I asked one day over dinner. She chewed in silence, then put down her fork with a deliberate motion that sent a warning signal through my body. "He's standing too close," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He stares too long, and he talks in a way that makes my skin crawl." "Who?" "Stephen Brenner, my boss." She looked up at me, eyes troubled. He's one of those nice guys, but every smile he gives has an expectation behind it. I was wary. I wasn't the jealous type. I'd never pushed into her work life, never offered advice she didn't ask for. But in this moment, I smelled something rotten. "What kind of expectation?" I asked. Carefully, Jen pushed her plate away. "Appetite gone yesterday. He said that if I were his cargo, he would work faster. And today night shifts help you get to know each other better." My stomach tightened. "And what did you say that I'm not interested straight up?" No smiles. No room for misinterpretation. I nodded, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. We understood each other without words. "He didn't like that," she added, voice hardening his eyes. Something changed in them, like a mask slipping for just a second. 3 days later, she was transferred to the night shift. A week after that, she received a warning for a documentation error. I was certain she hadn't made Jen's. A pendant. Spreadsheets are her middle name. She checks everything before submitting it. Is this revenge? I asked that morning as she crawled into bed exhausted from her night shift. "Obviously," she sighed, burying her face in the pillow. The rage I'd been suppressing boiled over. I paced our bedroom, fist clenched. "This is harassment. Jen, clear as day, you need to report him." She laughed bitterly. "To who, Mike?" Yartamjur reports directly to him. The company owner is his uncle. The whole operation is one big Brenner family business. Then we go outside the company. There must be stop. She cut me off sitting up despite her exhaustion. We need this job. Mike, the bill's your mom's treatment. We can't risk it. I'll handle him. I couldn't leave it like that. But I couldn't just barge into his office and say, "Hey, I'm her husband. Get your paws off." Bro, that would only make things worse for Jen in a town like Beaumont. Word travels fast. She might never find another decent job locally that night. As Jen slept fitfully beside me, I formulated a plan, a dangerous, desperate plan that could backfire spectacularly, but I couldn't see another option. What if I got a job at the same factory I suggested the next morning over coffee as a loader, or something under a different name? My mother's maiden name, Jen, nearly choked on her coffee. Have you lost your mind? Hear me out. I insisted I could take a leave from Wilson's. Andy owes me after I covered his cruise when his dad was sick. I'd work in the warehouse, gather information, find out if Brenner's doing this to other women. That's insane. She protested. If he finds out, he won't. I promised I'll be just another face on the warehouse floor. He's never even seen me right. You don't have pictures of me at your desk. After hours of debate. Jen reluctantly agreed, but with strict conditions I couldn't confront Brenner IC. Wouldn't jeopardize my position at Wilson's, and I had to promise that if nothing came of it within a month, I dropped the whole thing. Andy was understanding when I requested a month's leave. No questions asked, he knew about my mother's health issues and assumed it was related to that. The next day, I began transforming myself into Jason Reynolds. Recently divorced warehouse worker from Houston, I bought different clothes, cheaper work boots, faded jeans, plain t-shirts without logos. I started growing a beard and got a shorter haircut at a barber shop I'd never visited before I practice, speaking with a slight drawl that wasn't my usual accent. Jen helped me craft a backstory with enough detail to be convincing, but simple enough to remember without tripping myself up. The application process at GolfPack was a joke. They were so desperate for warehouse staff that my fabricated experience and fake reference, courtesy of my buddy Cal, pretending to be a former supervisor, were barely checked after a single day of basic safety training. I was in badge clipped to my belt, steel-toed boots laced tight. Just another body on the floor of the massive meat processing facility. The work was punishing, far colder and more physically demanding than construction, endless pallets of frozen meat products to be stacked, sorted, and loaded onto trucks, back-breaking labor in refrigerated rooms that made my fingers ache and my lungs burn by the end of my first shift. Every muscle screamed in protest, but I wasn't there for the job. I was there to listen, and on day 3 the story started coming. "You're new. Have you seen Lily from First Shift?" asked Carlos, a veteran loader who'd been showing me the ropes. She was transferred 2 nights after she didn't agree to the trip with Brenner. Brenner, I played dumb. The boss upstairs? Yeah? Stephen Brenner. Carlos continued lowering his voice, though no supervisors were nearby. 3rd generation entitled. Thinks the female staff are part of his inheritance. He shook his head disgustedly, but he, as like a shark, if he doesn't smell weakness, he loses interest. Lily fought back. Got punished with night shift. That's messed up, I said, carefully. Doesn't anyone report him? Carlos barked a laugh. To who is uncle, the company belongs to the Brenner family. This isn't the kind of town where that ends well for people like us. Last month, a girl from accounting disappeared after a visit to his office. She just never came back. Her name was erased from the schedule, like she never existed. My blood ran cold, disappeared. You mean she quit, maybe? Or maybe she got paid to stay quiet or threatened. Who knows? He glanced around nervously. Look, man, word of advice. Keep your head down. Do your job. Collect your check. Don't make waves. Especially don't cross the Brenners. This town belongs to them. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral, while fury built inside me. That night I wrote down everything in a notebook I kept hidden in my truck. Names, dates, specific incidents that Carlos and others had mentioned. And when Jen and I crossed paths during the brief hour between her night shift ending and my day shift beginning, I shared what I'd learned. She was silent as I spoke, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten, but I saw a change in her eyes, a spark igniting. She was no longer just a victim of Brenner's harassment. She was gaining perspective on a much larger pattern of abuse. I'm not the only one. She whispered, a strange mix of relief and horror in her voice. Not by a long shot, I confirmed, and from what I'm hearing, he's been at this for years, her jaw set with determination. I want names, women who've experienced this firsthand, people who might be willing to talk. I'm working on it, I promised. Just be careful, okay? This guy sounds dangerous. Over the next few weeks, I became the warehouse's best listener. I'd casually bring up Brenner's name during breaks, then pay close attention to the reactions some men would clam up immediately, either loyal to management or simply afraid, but others, especially those with female relatives or friends who'd worked at Gulfpack, were eager to share stories. Once they trusted me, I worked extra shifts whenever possible, volunteering for assignments that would put me in contact with different departments. I memorized names, noted patterns, identified potential allies. When I could, I'd engineer accidental meetings with women who'd been mentioned in stories, bumping into them in the break room, asking for help, finding supplies, any excuse to establish a connection. Some saw through me immediately. "What's your game, Reynolds?" demanded Marissa from accounting, cornering me in the parking lot. After I'd made yet another excuse to visit her department 3 times in 1 week, you've been up to my floor. You're not hitting on me because you barely make eye contact. So what's your angle? I took a risk. I've heard things about Stephen Brenner, about how he treats women here, how he punishes those who don't play along her face, when pale. Who sent you? If he's trying to intimidate me, no one sent me. I insisted the opposite. I'm trying to build a case against him. She laughed bitterly. Good luck with that. I filed a formal complaint last year. Want to know what happened? She pulled a letter from her purse. They said I was making false accusations and put me on probation. Meanwhile, he got promoted. I lowered my voice. What if it wasn't just you? What if multiple women came forward together with documentation, evidence, witnesses? A flicker of hope crossed her face. You serious about this? Deadly serious? After a long pause, she nodded. There's a CAR in Affy in Port Arthur, 20 me east, the Blue Spoon, Sunday at 10 euro. I'll bring people who might talk that Sunday morning. Jen and I arrived at the cafe early, securing a private room in the back. To my amazement, 7 women showed up, including Marissa, Lily, and Monica from data entry. Some still worked at Gulfpack. Others had quit or been fired months or years ago. All carried some form of evidence. Emails, texts, performance reviews that had suddenly turned negative after rejections. He started with compliments, Monica explained, her hands shaking slightly as she spoke. Always about my appearance, never my work. Then came the invitations, drinks, dinner, business trips where we'd accidentally be booked in adjoining rooms. When I refuse, added Lily. The retaliation was immediate night shift, reduced responsibilities, constant criticism. He made sure everyone knew I was difficult to work with. Ashley, who'd worked in human resources before quitting 6 months earlier, provided the most damning evidence. I saw the complaints, all of them, at least 12 in the 3 years I worked there, each one mysteriously resolved with no action taken when I questioned my supervisor about it. I was told the Brenner family handles these matters personally. She pulled out a flash drive. I made copies of everything before I left. I knew some days someone would need them one by one. They shared their experiences. The pattern was undeniable and horrifying in its consistency. Brenner targeted women who needed their jobs, who couldn't easily find equivalent work elsewhere. He used the company's family-owned structure to ensure complaints went nowhere. He wielded professional consequences like weapons. The emails said Kelly, who'd worked in marketing. Before quitting 6 months ago, he was careful, never explicitly sexual in writing, but inappropriate enough, and I have the emails from HR dismissing my concerns. By the end of the 3-hour meeting, we had compiled enough material to fill a binder. Names, dates, incidents, documentation, a devastating portrait of systematic harassment stretching back years. What now? Asked Lily. We can't go to the company. We've tried that. No, I agreed. But we can go around them. That evening, I did something I'd never done before. In my life, I wrote a formal complaint to the state's workers' union, detailing the pattern of harassment at Gulfpack Foods, with statements from all 7 women. I also filed an anonymous report to OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, citing serious workplace ethics violations, harassment, and deliberate suppression of complaints. Then we waited. Days passed with no response. A week, 2, they're ignoring it. Jen feared maybe the Brenners have connections in the union too. Then we escalate. I insisted state labor board, legal action, whatever it takes. But before we could implement our next plan, action came from an unexpected direction. I was loading pallets one Tuesday morning when a sudden hush fell over the warehouse. 4 people in professional attire had entered, 2 in plain clothes and 2 wearing official OSHA vests. They spoke briefly with the floor supervisor, then headed straight for the administrative offices. My phone buzzed with a text from Jen. They're here for a moment. I feared I'd be identified as the whistleblower, but the inspectors passed by without a glance in my direction. 20 minutes later, another text from Jen. Brenner is in a stupor. One of them is reading my complaint alone. I smiled for the first time in weeks when I went out for my break. I spotted one of the OSHA inspectors standing by the loading dock, talking intensely on the phone while taking notes. Workers whispered nervously to each other, and management looked positively ashen. Then Brenner appeared, striding across the warehouse floor. Like an angry bull, his usual smooth confidence was replaced by barely contained rage. He moved through the space, deliberately looking everyone up and down with contempt. The gold Rolex on his wrist catching the light. His face was no longer smiling. His gaze was sharp, his lips pressed into a thin line. He stopped near my station, fixing me with a penetrating stare. "Jason Reynolds, is it?" he growled, looking as if he were trying to see through my disguise. "New to the 3rd crew." I nodded calmly, though my heart hammered in my chest. Had he discovered my true identity? Be careful. He continued, voice low enough that only I could hear. Not everyone here knows when to keep their mouths shut. Those who talk find themselves without jobs. Or worse, the threat hung in the air. Between us, as he walked away. His expensive shoes clicking against the concrete floor. That same afternoon, something unprecedented happened. An independent auditor from an HR consulting firm arrived at the warehouse. The company went into full damage control mode. Brenner disappeared for several days. New behavior policies were hastily distributed, internal conversations were conducted with employees, and then, most surprisingly, a general meeting of the entire warehouse staff was called. Henry Brenner, Stephen's uncle, and the company's owner stood before the assembled workers, his usual confidence notably absent. "We are conducting an internal investigation," he announced repeatedly, wiping sweat from his forehead, despite the air conditioning. "If anyone has information about abuse of office or unacceptable actions, we have established a confidential hotline. Reports will be accepted anonymously." Whispers rippled through the crowd. This was unprecedented, a Brenner essentially admitting that something might be wrong with how the company was run. After the meeting, I made my decision. It was time to stop hiding. The next morning, I didn't go to work as Jason Reynolds' warehouse loader. Instead, I put on my best clothes, the ones I wore to manage my crew at Wilson's, and drove to the Gulfpack administrative headquarters. I'd like to speak with Henry Brenner. I told the receptionist my name is Michael Connor. I'm Jennifer Hope's husband. Her eyes widened slightly. Clearly, she knew who Jen was and what had been happening. Do you have an appointment, Mr. Connor? No, I said firmly, but he'll want to see me. I was kept waiting for nearly an hour, but eventually I was ushered into a conference room where Henry Brenner sat with two men in EXP. Ensive suits, company lawyers, I assumed Mr. Connor. The older Brenner began coldly. I understand you're related to one of our employees. My wife, Jennifer Hope, I confirmed, who has been sexually harassed by your nephew since the day she started working here. The lawyers exchanged glances, but I pressed on before they could speak. I'm not just here to complain, I said, placing a flash drive and a thick folder on the table. I'm here with evidence, voice recordings, written statements and testimonies that we've compiled with other victims of Stephen's behavior. Noah's, I nodded to Jack Martinez, a union lawyer who had quietly entered the room behind me, the same one who had defended warehouse workers in a similar case several years earlier. We have options. Martinez stated calmly, this can be handled internally with appropriate actions and compensation for the affected employees. Or it can become very public very quickly. They received us in shock silence, as Martinez outlined the legal exposure Golfpack was facing. I watched Henry Brenner's expression shift from dismissive to concerned to genuinely alarmed. These are serious allegations. One lawyer finally said, his tone measured, but his face betraying unease. They're not allegations, I corrected. They're documented incidents with multiple witnesses. Spanning years, your company has a systemic problem, and it starts with Stephen Brenner. Henry Brenner leaned forward, studying me with narrowed eyes. You've gone to considerable lengths, Mr. Connor, taking a job under false pretenses, collecting private information. I did what W. As necessary when the proper channels failed. I replied evenly. When your HR department buried complaints when women were punished for refusing your nephew's advances. You have no proof of actually. Martinez interrupted, sliding a document across the table. We have signed statements from a former HR employee confirming that complaints were systematically suppressed at the direction of senior management. Henry's face drained of color as he scanned the document. He whispered something to one of the lawyers who frowned deeply in response. We'll need time to review all this material. The lawyer said, You have 48 hours. Martinez replied, After that, we proceed with legal action and formal complaints to every relevant regulatory body. There, as we left the building, I felt both exhilarated and terrified. I had just confronted one of the most powerful families in Beaumont, essentially accusing them of orchestrating a cover-up of sexual harassment. There would be consequences. I just didn't know yet if they would be good or bad. The answer came faster than expected. The next day, a notice was posted throughout the facility. Stephen Brenner had been temporarily suspended, pending investigation. 2 days after that, a second notice appeared. He had been terminated effective immediately without severance pay, but the changes didn't stop there within a week. Golfpack announced the implementation of a victim protection program. An external HR firm was hired to handle all personnel matters, and Henry Brenner issued a statement to all employees apologizing for management failures that had allowed inappropriate behavior to go unchecked for Jen. The impact was immediate and positive. She was returned to the day shift without question her documentation error. Warning was expuned from her record, and most satisfyingly, she was appointed senior logistician in the second unit, a promotion she had deserved for months. As for me, I revealed my true identity to my warehouse colleagues, many of whom were shocked but ultimately supportive. Once they understood my motivations on my last day, I handed in my badge to the shift supervisor with a message, Tell Brenner, when he shows up again, that I too did not agree to the trip. The supervisor grinned knowingly with pleasure. Man, and thanks for what you did. This place needed it. I thought our battle with Stephen Brenner was over. I was wrong. 2 weeks after I returned to my job at Wilson's, Jen called me in a panic during her lunch break. "Someone slashed my tires," she said, her voice shaking, all four of them, and there was a note on my windshield. "What did it say?" I asked, already grabbing my keys and heading for my truck. "First warning." Er? She paused, then added, "Mike. I think it was Stephen. One of the security guards mentioned seeing him in the parking lot this morning." I drove to Golf Pack at breakneck speed, arriving to find Jen standing beside her car, surrounded by several concerned coworkers. The damage was obvious. 4 tires methodically cut along the sidewalls, making repair impossible. A small white card was bagged in a plastic sandwich bag from someone's lunch. The threatening note preserved as evidence. The security footage confirmed our suspicions. At 7:15 that morning, Stephen Brenner had entered the parking lot in a car we didn't recognize hood. Up, despite the warm weather, he'd spent less than 2 minutes at Jen's car before driving away. Henry Brenner was called down to view the footage himself. His face tightened with anger and what looked like genuine shame. "I'm deeply sorry, Mrs. Connor," he said to Jen, surprising me with his sincerity. "I didn't want to believe Stephen was capable of this level of behavior. I was wrong." He turned to his head of security. "Call the police, press charges, and double the patrols in the parking lot." The police took statements and collected evidence, but warned us that without clear facial recognition from the footage, it might be difficult to prove it was Stephen. The hood had obscured his face from the cameras that night, as we drove home in my truck. Jen's car now at a tire shop getting 4 new tires at Golf Pack's expense. She turned to me with worried eyes. What if he escalates? What if the tires are just the beginning? I reached over and squeezed her hand. "We'll be careful. Extra security at home. Dash cams in our vehicles. The whole deal. And we'll make sure he knows that if anything happens to us all, the evidence goes public immediately." For the next few days, we lived in a state of heightened awareness. I installed security cameras around our house. We varied our routines, taking different routes to work, parking in different spots. Jen never went anywhere alone at the facility. Then came the confrontation I'd been both dreading and anticipating. I was loading supplies into my truck outside Home Depot when a voice called out behind me, "You think you've won, don't you?" I turned to find Stephen Brenner standing there unshaven and disheveled, a far cry from the polished executive I'd seen in the warehouse. His eyes were bloodshot, his clothes rumpled as if he'd been sleeping in them. "Brenner," I acknowledged, positioning myself so I could see his hands. "Heard you've been busy in parking lots lately." A flash of surprise crossed his face before his expression hardened. "I don't know what you're talking about, but I do know you destroyed my life based on lies and exaggerations." 16 women, Stephen 16. Separate accounts of harassment, coercion and retaliation. Were they all lying? He stepped closer, alcohol heavy on his breath. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. The Brenners built this town. One phone call from my uncle, and your precious construction job. Disappears, another call, and your wife is blacklisted from every company in 3 counties. I laughed, which clearly wasn't the reaction. He expected, "Your uncle is the one who called the police on you." Genius, he saw the security footage. He knows what you did. Confusion flickered across Brenner's face, quickly replaced by rage. He's family who's finally realized what you really are. I replied, "A predator who's been protected for too long." Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. He glanced around the nearly empty parking lot, then back at me. "You think this is over? It's not even close to over. Tell your wife to watch her back. Tell all those lying." I didn't let him finish before he could react. I had him pinned against my truck, my forearm across his chest. "Listen carefully," I growled. Months of pent-up rage surging through me. "If anything happens to my wife or any of those women, I will personally ensure that everyone in Texas knows exactly what kind of man you are. The evidence we have, it's backed up in multiple locations. If I get so much as a paper cut, it all goes public." Fear flickered across his face as he struggled ineffectively against my grip. "You're threatening me? Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are," I replied. "A coward who preys on women who can't fight back. How does it feel to be the vulnerable one? For a change." I released him abruptly, and he stumbled, gasping more from shock than lack of air. For a moment I thought he might attack me, but something in my expression must have warned him against it. Instead, he straightened his shirt with shaking hands, trying to reclaim some dignity. "This isn't over," he muttered, backing away. "Not by a long shot." "Actually, it is," came a female voice from behind us. We both turned to see an older woman approaching, expression stern. "Stephen, get in the car now." I recognized her immediately from company photos. Margaret Brenner, Henry's wife, and Stephen's aunt. Stephen's demeanor changed instantly, like a scolded child. "Aunt Margaret, I was just making a fool of yourself and threatening this man, from what I could hear." She cut him off the car now as he slunk away. Margaret turned to me. "Mr. Connor, I presume?" I nodded, unsure what to expect. "Henry showed me everything," she said, her voice softer but no less authoritative. "I want you to know that I've been pushing for Stephen's removal for years. His behavior was an open secret in the family, but my concerns were dismissed as women's hysteria." Her expression hardened. "Not anymore. The board of directors meets tomorrow to discuss structural changes. I've been named ahead of the new ethics committee." I wasn't sure I believed her claim about opposing Stephen all along, but I appreciated the direction things were heading. "It shouldn't have taken this much effort to stop harassment in your company, Mrs. Brenner." "No," she agreed. "Surprising me, it shouldn't have. And I bear some responsibility for not fighting harder." She handed me a business card. "If there are ever any additional concerns from your wife or any employee, my door is always open with that." She walked to her car, where Stephen waited, looking for all the world like a scolded teenager, rather than the powerful executive he'd once been. The final confrontation with Stephen Brenner came a week later, and from a direction none of us expected. Jen and I were having dinner with Marissa and two other women from the group, when Marissa's phone rang. After a brief conversation, her face went pale. "That was Ashley from HR," she said. After hanging up, Stephen showed up at Golf Pack drunk, demanding to see his uncle when security tried to remove him. He started screaming about how those lions had ruined his life. He had a gun. "Mike, my blood ran cold." "Is everyone okay?" She nodded. "Security tackled him before he could do anything. Police have him in custody now." But the gun was loaded, and he was ranting about making examples of traitors. The next day, we learned the full story. Stephen had planned to confront his uncle during a board meeting, apparently hoping to convince the directors that he was the victim of a conspiracy when denied entry to the building. He'd become enraged and pulled out a handgun he had no permit to carry. Security footage showed him shouting, "You'll all see what happens to people who cross me." Before being subdued by 3 guards in his car, police found a list of names, including Jensen's, Marissa's, and mine, along with our home addresses and work schedules. He was charged with trespassing, making terroristic threats, unlawful possession of a firearm, and attempted assault. Given his family connections, we worried he might get a slap on the wrist, but we underestimated how thoroughly he had alienated even his own relatives. Henry and Margaret Brenner refused to post his bail or pay for his legal defense. In a move that shocked everyone, they provided prosecutors with documentation of previous violent incidents that had been covered up, including a bar fight 3 years earlier, where Stephen had hospitalized another patron who had accidentally spilled a drink on his designer suit at the arraignment. The judge, clearly unimpressed by the Brenner name, denied bail, citing the defendant's demonstrated pattern of escalating behavior and specific threats against identified individuals. Stephen would spend 6 months in county jail before accepting a plea deal. 18 months, probation, mandatory, anger, management and alcohol treatment, and a restraining order, preventing him from coming within 500 FT of Gulf Pack Foods, or any of the women who had testified against him. Most satisfyingly, his guilty plea became a matter of public record, documented proof of his behavior that would follow him for the rest of his life. 1 year later, Gulf Pack Foods is a different company under Margaret Brenner's influence. The board implemented comprehensive anti-harassment policies with real enforcement mechanisms. The external HR firm still handles all complaints independently, and most surprisingly, Henry Brenner established a professional development program specifically for female employees, with Jen serving on its advisory committee. As for Stephen Brenner, he left Beaumont entirely after his probation terms allowed him to relocate. Last we heard, he was working at a struggling distribution center in Arkansas. No corner office-y. No family connections to protect him. His reputation in tatters. Jen still works at Gulfac now as the department head for logistics after her predecessor retired. I'm back at Wilson's, having been promoted to general manager when Andy decided to open a second location. We're expecting our first child in August, a daughter. We've decided to name Lily, after the woman whose courage in speaking out first inspired others to do the same. Last month, I ran into Ashley, the former HR employee, whose evidence had been so crucial to our case. She's back at Gulf Pack, now helping implement the new policies she once fought for in vain. I almost didn't come to that cafe meeting. She admitted I was so sure nothing would change, that the system was too strong, too entrenched. What made you decide to come? I asked. She smiled, something my grandmother used to say. One voice can be ignored. Many voices become a chorus, and a chorus can bring down walls. That chorus has continued to grow since the changes at Gulf Pack. 2 other major employers in Beaumont have overhauled their harassment policies. A support group for workplace harassment victims now meets monthly, providing both emotional support and practical advice to those still fighting their battles. I'm not a hero. I'm just a man who couldn't stand by and watch his wife be humiliated. A man who recognized that sometimes justice requires taking risks and standing up against power. And now, when Brenner's name is mentioned in Beaumont, it's not as their golden boy with the Rolex, but as a cautionary tale of what happens when wealth and privilege are used as weapons. My wife and I prove that in this town, no one, not even a Brenner, has the right to violate another person's dignity and remain unpunished. Last night, as Jen and I sat on our porch watching the sunset, her hand resting on her growing belly, she squeezed my fingers and said something that perfectly captured our journey. You know what's funny? Brenner always talked about how powerful he was, how connected, how untouchable. But in the end, it took just a repair guy and a logistics clerk to bring him down. I smiled and raised my iced tea in a toast to the repair guy and the logistics clerk. And to all the women who stood up with us, she added, her free hand protectively, cradling our future daughter to justice. I agreed, however long it takes. Several months passed. Jen works calmly. There was even a smile that I had not seen since spring. We are together again in the evenings, without stress, without alarm calls. I am not a hero. I am just a man who could not silently watch his wife being humiliated.
Thank you so much.